So what questions remain surrounding the agreement President Trump brokered with CCP leader Xi Jinping? And will Communist China honor its agreement to crack down on companies selling illicit fentanyl precursors to the Mexican cartels? To assess, we're happy to have with us Ken Rapoza, industry expert with the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Ken Rapoza, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me on, Steve.
It's great to have you with us, Ken. Obviously, high-stakes meeting in South Korea between President Trump and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Seems to have been some concessions made, commitments to U.S. soybean purchases, a renewed cooperation on curbing fentanyl precursors coming out of China, as well as suspending export controls for 1 year. Ultimately, though, Ken, who do you think walked away with the upper hand in this negotiation?
I call it a stalemate, actually, because what we really have here is a deal for rare earths for chips, right? That was the deal that was in place since May. Recall that that was going haywire, and then there was going to be tariffs imposed. And then China said, we will send you some rare earths. We're not going to make it more difficult for you guys to get these goods. And so there was a tariff hold until November, which was going to kick in and change everything. So now we've had a talk on making that exchange, rare earths, which we don't have, for chips, which China wants for some of their supercomputers, and that is going to hold for 1 year. All the other things that you mentioned, like soybeans and China's promise to crack down on the precursor drugs that are sold to the Mexican cartels to make fentanyl, these were deals that were already agreed upon back in 2017, if you recall, during the Phase 1 China trade agreement. So that's nothing new. The only real new thing here would be the 1 year pause on banning rare earths, and for China, making it easier for them to access high-end semiconductors.
So with regard, Ken, to the 1 year pause in certain areas, are there any areas that you feel as though are still sensitive where the deal could go haywire? Where are some of still the sticking points and biggest question marks?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest question marks are, recall that the United States has already put quite a bit of bans on certain types of chips going to China. So these would be high-end, advanced microchips that would be used for AI and maybe even civil defense use, like rockets and military use, obviously, right? Which, of course, they can be used for that. Even if you're saying you're going to buy it to, for a data center, it could always be used for those ends. So the question is whether or not China is going to gain access to those, and whether there is a removal of all of those chips that were previously not necessarily banned, but they required permission from the Commerce Department to allow you to export that to China. Whether or not those bans, those restrictions have been lifted, I'm not sure. We'll have to see the details. I'm pretty sure that China is going to want to have those restrictions lifted. Otherwise, they're going to say, well, what's in it for me to send you rare earths, right? And the United States wants these rare earths today. We went to Asia. We signed rare critical mineral pacts with Australia in October. We did the same recently with Japan, Thailand, and Malaysia. But this isn't going to satisfy the U.S.'s needs at this time. China is the behemoth there. They control that market. And so if we want rare earths now, we had to make some kind of concession. And the question is whether or not the concession is that restrictions on high-end chips are going to be removed. And I think that for the most part, they will be.
High-stakes chess match taking place right before us. Ken, President Trump says that he expects to see real action coming from the CCP with regard to fentanyl. The CCP has been subsidizing companies that send those fentanyl precursors to Latin America. To what extent do you think we can expect follow-through on this issue, and is it really even measurable?
I don't know. I don't think it's measurable, honestly, because again, China's a big country. A lot of stuff happens at the provincial level, and what they say in Beijing holds no weight at the provincial level. So whether or not and look, we just have to look in the rearview mirror here. China has already promised to do this in Trump, his first term, 2017, they promised to do this. Never happened. Obviously, a fentanyl crisis got worse. They promised again, recall when Biden and Trump and Xi Jinping met in San Francisco, if you recall that story, when San Francisco had a bunch of fentanyl addicts on the streets and the streets were cleaned up instantly to welcome Xi Jinping. That became national news. And the promise was again made that we will crack down on these companies that are selling precursor chemicals to the cartels. Was that done? Doesn't look like it was because, of course, 2 years after that, we still have the fentanyl crisis. The main thing, of course, though, with the fentanyl crisis is to go after the Mexican cartels. If you stop them, then Chinese precursors, they could send the precursors all day long. If you stop the final product from coming into the United States, that's where the fight really begins. I don't hold much weight in terms of China's promise on this issue because they failed since 2018, and I don't think they'll succeed again. They haven't succeeded yet, so I don't think they'll succeed at all.
Lastly, to your point about, the gap between Beijing, the capital of the country, and at the provincial level, there's been a lot of talk about, people think that China rules with an iron fist, Xi rules with the iron fist. A lot of people don't realize that there's a ton of infighting and different factions even within the CCP. Looking beneath the surface at these negotiations, do you get any glimpse into what's going on in China right now internally?
Well, yes, absolutely. China internally is concerned that with the trade war with the United States, its biggest trading partner, obviously, is hurting manufacturing in China. This is a huge headwind for China because, of course, the China promise, the CCP promise to the average Joe in China is, we're going to give you upward mobility. We promise that. And for generation, the Chinese have seen that. So when all of a sudden that changes, and it looks sort of like what the United States looked like when outsourcing began here in earnest in the late 90s and early 2000s, once China joined the WTO in particular, then and labor got crushed here in the United States, especially manufacturing labor. If that's going to happen, even in a small degree in China, where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are laid off and can't find jobs, well, that's a big headwind for the CCP. And I would assume that there are powers around Xi Jinping that would say something has to be done here to play ball with the United States, unless we're going to have to deal with some civil unrest. And the Chinese will protest. We've seen it. When the Chinese are pushed against a wall, they will protest. We saw it in COVID, and of course, historically with the Tiananmen Square story in the 1980s. So they have to keep. The Chinese government has to make sure that the Chinese people have upward mobility. And if you're going to keep the trade war the way it is, and that's still going on after this meeting in Asia, we still have the tariffs in place, then it's still a headwind for China. So to say that the United States has lost and China has the upper hand here is a little far-fetched. I mean, of course, China does have a hand with rare earths, and they played it well. But the United States is, of course, their main partner on trade, and China does not want to lose that.
It's an excellent point. A lot of people have said that for that upward mobility that you spoke of, the Chinese people have turned a blind eye to the draconian nature of the CCP. So when the economic downturn happens in China, we'll see if people start to speak out. Ken Rapoza, really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.